Community Mental Health Forum. It's, I think, the first pandemic we're all experiencing together. So of course, that makes sense. We appreciate you joining this evening. Before I formally get into introductions, I just want you to know there is no pressure to turn on your camera. Of course, we'll ask you to mute so that any background noise can be managed. Should you wish to come on camera at any point, that is more than fine. But if you'd like to keep your camera off all night, that's just okay. Really, the reason for this forum, I think, is fairly self-evident, but obviously with a third lockdown, the reality is that we felt, and we're hearing from many, many different parents about an extended series of disruptions and adjustments, certainly in the lives of children. And many of us on the call, including myself, Councillor Strachan, we are active parents and mothers of school-age kids. Councillor O'Sullivan, who joins us this evening, is a very caring and connected grandmother. And of course, my other council colleagues are parents as well. So we know that this is a really, really tough time for the mental health of children, and felt it was useful to bring people together and to feature some of the incredible resources in this community and in this region that can be of a support to families directly, to children and youth directly, or just as resources that exist that you may wish to avail of in the future, not necessarily now. We understand that mental health is quite personal. That's why we provided a space prior to the forum for participants to submit questions anonymously. And in fact, we received quite a few questions. So we'll start with those this evening. You also have the opportunity throughout the forum to ask questions in the chat box. And Jill Sturdy, who's on the call, will be moderating questions over chat and making sure that we ask them of our presenters this evening. We're also live streaming, as I think you know, on YouTube, and we're aware that many people may be tuning in via YouTube either now or plan to do so later. And finally, if you have friends and colleagues who you think should jump on the call, the Zoom call, they can simply send an email to mayor@northgrenville.on.ca and get the link, or you can share it with them directly, which may be even easier. The reality is that this discussion this evening will touch upon an array of sensitive topics, including self-harm, youth suicide, and drug abuse. There will all obviously also be general questions around just how to manage sibling rivalry, kids' boredom. What's the baseline? I think what is the new baseline for family well-being when we're in such extraordinary times? So a wide array of topics will be addressed. We want you to know that if you get triggered this evening or you think you need urgent and critical support, the Ottawa Distress Centre line is available to you 24/7, and you can Google them, or you can reach them at 613-238-3311. So that is a resource, and I am aware of people in this community that have used the Ottawa Distress Line at 2 in the morning. So you can get some support as a parent if you're feeling particularly overwhelmed. I'm not going to take up much more time because it's really critical that we hear from some amazing experts in our community. We expect to go until 8:30 this evening. As I said, we're going to start with some questions from people in the community who wanted to ask things in advance, and that gives us a chance to kind of get the ball rolling. But before we go to those questions, very quickly, I am going to introduce our panelists. And I'll start, of course, with, I think, Cheryl Gaumont. Cheryl, is that your last name? Okay. Cheryl is a registered psychotherapist who works as part of the counseling therapy team at the walk-in clinic at the Children's Mental Health of Leeds and Grenville. She's been there for 6 years, and she's worked for her sister agency, or the sister agency, Open Doors for Lanark Children and Youth. Thank you, Cheryl, for being here. Lisa Livington also joins us from Leeds and Grenville Children's Mental Health. Lisa has worked in the field of children's mental health for a number of years and provides psychotherapy services to children, youth, and their families. And Children's Mental Health of Leeds and Grenville, they actually provide a walk-in clinic that they'll talk about, where you can get a same-day appointment to see either yourself or your child together or apart. So they are an ongoing available service to us. So I know we often hear about wait lists and not being able to get the right expert at the right time, but Children's Mental Health does continue to have a walk-in clinic that may be of some use. Kim Champagne is also with us. She's a psychotherapist with Juniper Counseling. Kim has provided psychotherapy to families and children for over 13 years, and she has a strong background in childhood trauma and attachment difficulties and works with kids experiencing anxiety, behavioral problems, self-harm, parenting, and depression. So lots there. Thank you so much, Kim. Kim doesn't live in the area, but lives very close by and is very kind to join us. We also have Diane Oxborough this evening, as you'll see on your screen. She's the program manager at Parents Lifeline of Eastern Ontario, a not-for-profit family peer support group. She has over 15 years of direct experience with youth and adults with mental health, and PLEO provides much needed support to parents and caregivers struggling with mental health challenges. And then finally, we have Chuck LeBlanc. Chuck is with the Kentville Stress Relief Center as the Chief Operations Officer, but he's also a mental health provider with a special interest in working with men and adolescents who experience anxiety, awkwardness, and depression. He also focuses on helping those who are held back by stress and those who wish to stop bottling up their emotions and be more present so that they can enjoy their lives. So thank you, a wide array of expertise and I think perspectives this evening. And we're so grateful to everyone who agreed so quickly to join us this evening. I recognize council colleagues. I think we also look forward to welcoming Jen Crawford. She's the new Executive Director of Kentville Pride. I believe she may be joining us this evening or maybe on the call. And Kentville Pride is obviously developing some critical resources and advocating on behalf of LGBTQ and two-spirited youth and adults in our community. So she may in fact also share some words closer to the end. So I'm going to kick off the questions now, and I've asked Councillor Strachan also to ask some of these questions to share the stage with me this evening. There's quite a few questions here, so we're going to go through, I would say, about 8 of them, and then we're going to take a pause and we will see if there are any questions in the chat, and then we'll go back to some of the pre-prepared questions. So I'll start with you, Kim, and the first question we received is, can you describe what you are seeing with the work you're doing with youth and adolescents during the pandemic? And obviously I think we're asking that because a lot of parents and families are wondering what is normal now, because it certainly might not feel like it did a year or 2 years ago. So I'll start with you, Kim. Thanks. Oh, and Kim will want you to unmute. And hopefully, Palak, you can make Kim the presenter while she answers this question.
Okay, sorry. You're absolutely right. We are not living in normal times. And so I think we have to expect that our lives with our kids is going to be different. So yeah, I'm happy to start off the evening talking about this. That I wrote it, and it feels like the list of doom and gloom of what's happening in our clinics. So you have to remember, kids aren't coming to me with all the good things that are happening in their life, right? So I know that there are lots of positives that are going on, but in terms of what I'm seeing in the clinic, in the office, is lots of change in the routine and structure of kids' lives. Their school has changed, their home life has changed, parents are working from home. Some families have job loss, there's lots of stress there. And having to adjust to that. Kids are fearing, I notice kids are fearing of doing the wrong thing. Which is creating a lot of anxiety. What if I stand too close to someone in the grocery store? What if I forget to sanitize my hands? What if I get in trouble at school for forgetting to put my mask on? There's worries about that. Noticing a lot of loss and grief. My gosh, loss of activities, loss of the travel with our family, loss of those personal family friend connections. The loss of the life we knew, the loss of school. And with that loss comes so much grief. And grief comes out often with anger, more irritability, agitation, stress, low mood. And that can lead to a lot of family stress and a lot of family conflict. I see a lot of parents stressing, struggling and feeling a lot of guilt and stress about I'm not able to have the same time that I used to have with my kids. I'm so busy, I'm working so much, or the time that I am with them, I'm so stressed. Some parents are needing other children in the home to help with the younger children. And, parents expressing, having to wear multiple hats, having to be a teacher and a parent and a spouse, an employee, and oftentimes all in the same minute. So it's a lot of pressure on parents. I'm hearing a lot of fears about academic future and social future. Of course, there's a lot of worry about screen time and social media use right now. And I'm hearing a lot of frustration from parents about the online learning, and from the youth as well, and how the class structure has changed. I mean, that's a bit of a summary of some of the things that we're seeing right now. Yeah.
Sorry, that's me on mute. I have kids at home too, so I'm trying to mute because sometimes there's background noise. I think it's reassuring to hear a little bit about what you're seeing and managing in your clinic, because I think it helps us to feel slightly less alone in our own experience, especially when you speak of family conflict, right? And increased family tensions, because so much of it is playing out at home. I'm going to ask Diane and Kim and Lisa, you're all down for this. The following question. So if you could, maybe we'll start with Diane. And Diane, I'm conscious that you have a parenting advocacy role, so you let me know if this question works for you. How can we best support parents, right now, given all of the, I think, shifts in the dynamics of families and the changes that we see in our own families and around us? What are the best and most practical ways we can support parents? So perhaps, Diane, you can take a shot at this, and then I'll turn to Lisa and Kim.
Absolutely. Thank you. I actually think this question falls really well after the first question you just posed. And yes, we are asked it often by families, what can they do in these times? Everything is so different and tumultuous. A lot of what we recommend, and hopefully others agree, is self-care is super important right now. It sounds so trite, but it really is something that the parent has to be in a place to be able to take care of themselves in order to take care of their families. And by self-care, I mean, that's also a family issue. So, little things, changing expectations at times, if possible, to lower the expectations a bit, so they're not putting so much pressure on themselves, trying to attain everything in a day for themselves and their children. They can watch a movie together, just very simple things with all the lockdowns and restrictions. Every time you turn around to try something new, it's closed again. So I say you just start with the simple things. It doesn't have to cost money. It can be watching a movie, doing board games. Not being afraid to reach out, I think, is also really important. I think there's a lot of feeling that parents are feeling like they're failing if they are not managing all of this. And there is still a stigma in admitting that it's something they could use some resources with, or some help, or someone to talk to that gets it. And I think my third recommendation would be trying to keep the communication within the family going. Very easy to all be frustrated and all go to your corners, and that can fester pretty quickly. So I think working on that, being aware of it, and enjoying your time with your family. It's a gift in a very strange way. I've had to look at my own family and really appreciate the things that I took for granted. So I can speak from experience on that.
Awesome. And Diane, if someone wants to call Clio, Parents Lifeline yes. of Eastern Ontario, what happens when you dial that number?
So there is a family navigator that picks up the line.
Mm-hmm.
It's a parent support and a navigation line. So if a parent wants to call in, or a caregiver, we ask, what has brought them to us today? Sometimes they just need an ear. They need somebody at the other end who will not judge them. It's safe, it's confidential. And, a big piece of what we do is we are not counselors, but we are parents with lived experience. And we are in the journey still. Some of us are through it. Some, it is a roller coaster at times. So if it's an ear to listen to, we do that. We also do a lot of system navigation. We refer to children's mental health all the time. We work together a lot. So that's another piece of what we do. We also help, we're not so much an advocate, but we will help parents dealing with the school system as well.
I see.
Try to be that collaborative approach so they're not feeling so intimidated.
Okay.
We have many branches. We have support groups too.
Great. And are you holding those support groups are virtual now?
They are. We shifted. We used to be at the Kemptville Hospital and we had a wonderful group going, and it was a regular group of parents that came. It was very sad to have to leave that and shift, but we have. So we have a lot of groups operating right now. Every Tuesday evening, we have groups for the parents of 0 to 12. It's an hour and a half long. It's virtual by Zoom. And on the Wednesday evenings, we have groups for the 13 to 25. So the parents of, you can drop in at any time. You can come to as many as you want. You get to speak with other parents that are struggling with a lot of the same issues, especially through the pandemic.
Great. That's great to know about. Okay, thank you. I'm going to shift to Lisa. Lisa, one of the things we talked about in the lead up to this call is how do we promote healthy habits during a pandemic when our child's current existence is in complete disarray? And I say this with 2 kids upstairs on screens, and I think screen time in particular is something that haunts many of us, and just the many other disruptions that I don't have to speak of, where we all know them. So, Lisa, I know I'd love to hear your perspective on that one.
Yes, and I want to say that I have to agree with you completely, Diane, that we really need to manage our expectations during this really, really difficult time. And, acknowledge with our kids and validate our kids that it's hard to carry on with all of these higher level activities that we're used to pursuing, educational, extracurricular, and so forth, and really having a look at those basic needs and making sure that those basic needs are being met at home. And what do I mean by basic needs? I'm talking about making sure that our kids and ourselves are getting adequate sleep, So I might recommend, for example, a regular sleep-wake routine, making sure that we're adding nutrition to our diet, that we're remembering to eat on a schedule, that we're getting some physical activity in the day. That we're trying to connect with our loved ones in creative ways. So these are sort of the basics of how we can stay well. Okay, so how do we promote this in our household? We recognize and we validate it's hard. I know you're not motivated, but invite your children and your youth into a discussion about what they want their day to look like. Help them come up with some great ideas of how they can incorporate some of these important things into their day, and really build a routine that they can rely on. Okay, so at this time, I think all of our routines have kind of gone to mush a little bit, and of course they have, right? So if we can start to build back in a little bit of structure at a time, focusing on some small goals, that's going to be very, very helpful. Children, particularly our young ones, they really thrive on this schedule. They will learn to look forward to the next activity, and be creative. So brainstorm with them, right? What are some of the things we could put in our schedule this week to get this need met? That need for connection or that need for physical activity. Brainstorm, get excited about that. So those are some of the things that I think about when we want to try and promote a healthy routine in our household.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I think, in some ways it does feel daunting, right? Because if you have multiple children at home or you're working, sometimes you can't control your routine. So Lisa, really quick follow-up. And I think then Councillor Starkey may be asking the next question for Cheryl. how much of a routine can we aim for? Like what's it, because it's easy to imagine a routine that you simply can't follow, right? Because there's so many other things hitting you. So we talking meals at the same time, or mostly a bedtime, right? That's more or less in the zone. Is that where you're at?
Yeah, absolutely. So this isn't going to be perfect, guys, right? It's not perfect in my household. I know that, right? It's not perfect for me. I think, when I'm talking with parents and when I'm talking with kids and youth and about, how they might be able to improve their routine, we have a look at the day, right? How are you spending your time? If folks are spending, most of the day on their screen, we're doing online learning right now, for example, I might ask, I wonder what one thing we could do to meet another need. What's one thing we might be able to do kind of after school and before supper as a family, or something that you might want to do by yourself? So small goals. It's like one thing, what one thing we can incorporate here.
Right. So not necessarily orchestrating a whole day, because I don't think anyone can do that right now. Yeah.
No, I think for our really, really young ones
yes,
that are at home, that's probably more important. And I would stress as well that I think it's important for us to look at sleep habits. So those are kind of the big things, making sure that because of this laxy-daisy kind of routine, our kids kind of sleeping into the day a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer. We really want to try and maintain kind of a healthy sleep-wake routine, because we know, right, that kids who are suffering from sleep deprivation are going to have all those signs and symptoms: anxiety, sleep deprivation, or anxiety, stress, irritability, all of those things, right? So it could be something simple as, as a family, you implement an internet curfew at, 10 o'clock or something like this, so that you're all kind of winding down. Right? So it's something that we can talk about as a family, about what are some of the important things, or what are some of the things we're really missing right now that would help us to feel better.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll turn it over to Councillor Starkian. I think she has a couple of the questions, and I think the first one is for Cheryl. Councillor Starkian.
Thank you. So first, thank you all for being here. I think it's fantastic to have this many resources available close to us in our community. So I guess the next couple of questions are sort of focused on how parents, as the sort of first line of defense, the ones who are seeing how things are unfolding at home, how they can manage certain parts. So the first question is about identifying signs and symptoms that we should be looking for as parents. I believe Kim had already talked about how she's seeing things on the professional side of things, but when you're a parent and you're sort of right in the thick of it and involved in the day-to-day, what would you give as the best way for parents to be able to say, okay, as I'm seeing these are some good signs and symptoms that we should be really looking out for when it comes to our kids' mental health? And I think this was a question for Cheryl to start.
Thank you. So I think it's a great question. And I like to say that I think one of the most important things is that behavior is communication. And so when we kind of look at things like that, like behavior is communication, then, children don't always have the language to express how they're feeling in words. And I mean, to be fair, as adults, we don't always have the language to express how we're feeling in words. Sometimes we don't even know how we're feeling. So I think it's about looking for some of those changes in behavior. What that could look like irritability, could look like withdrawal, could look like angry outbursts, sadness, fear, increased worry, lack of sort of taking care of basic hygiene as well, or inability to do tasks that previously they were able to do. Sleep disruptions as well could be a big one. any sort of regressions in behavior as well. You might notice extra need to be around a parent or caregiver, distress at being separated from a caregiver, increased need for comfort, those kind of things. So those would all be potential signs of how behavior is trying to communicate some of those underlying feelings. That's certainly not an exhaustive list. And I do think it's important that, as parents, I mean, you are the experts in your child's life. You know your children very well. And I get that you're pulled in all different directions as well, with hearing advice, from well-meaning family and friends, getting advice, hearing some things online. And I think that's really hard for parents too, because they sometimes question themselves and question their knowledge about their children, but noticing those changes in behavior. And then I would also say that, it's important as well to have a bit of a reframe too, with if you notice where you're feeling like my children are giving me a hard time, trying to reframe that as they're not giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time. And then if we can reframe it like that, I think it takes away that feeling that it's personal, right? Feeling that behavior is personal. So, and certainly when it comes to having language for emotions, we can look at different ways to sort of foster the language around emotions. I think we oftentimes, all of us have a tendency to ask, how are you? And we don't always know how to answer that question. And I think that, in pre-pandemic times, we do these exchanges, briefly in the hallway or on the phone. How are you? I'm good. How are you? But were we really sort of listening to the answer or hearing what was behind that answer? So I would say we kind of need to change up our language a little bit and model different ways to express emotions or to name emotions. So one example would be, instead of asking, how are you feeling? You might ask, if how you were feeling was a weather system, what would the weather be today? So it's a little different saying, oh, it's cloudy with a chance of a thunderstorm. We all kind of get an image of what that looks like versus sunny skies. Another option would be, if how you were feeling were an animal, what would the animal be? So again, very, very kind of playful, creative. I think it's fun for children and adults. It doesn't matter the age of the person. I just think it conveys a very different message for getting across, how we're feeling, and opens up that line of communication.
Those are fantastic examples. I think that, it's always going to be a challenge to find the right balance with communication and drawing information from the kids. I think we've all been there and asking how their school day went, and every day was fine, even when it wasn't fine. So trying to find the right way to ask those questions for sure. And in more dynamic houses, obviously more kids and different ways of coping and different reactions, those certainly add different layers of complexity to this. But thank you. I appreciate that response. And I guess in line with that, and looking to perhaps Lisa and Diane, when we're seeing these things, and maybe recognizing that, I guess absolutely recognizing that the situation that we're in is uncommon and uncomfortable for most of us, and that there's a certain level of anxiety associated with this. How would you recommend that parents can help alleviate the anxiety about COVID and having to deal with everything that comes with that? And parents are one part of it, but kids are obviously have different ways of interpreting and are living a slightly different reality as well, because of school circumstances and their social networks and so on. So what can we do as parents to help alleviate the anxiety about COVID specifically with our children?
I think this is a really excellent question, and one that needs to be focused on. Our children are scared, and I think we're scared as well. This is really uncharted territory. So our kids are going to be anxious. Our kids are going to have worries and questions about COVID-19 and what's going to happen to their loved ones and so forth. So this is certainly something that we've seen a lot of in our adult population, as well as our children and youth. What I would say is really important as a parent who is responding to a child or youth that's expressing anxiety or worry about COVID-19 is to really take the time to connect when those questions or concerns come up, and acknowledge and validate that fear and anxiety, that it's real, and that everything is strange. So that's a really important point. I think as parents, and I fall into this category too at times, we really want our kids to feel great all the time. So we tend to put on the fix it hat, or the problem solving hat, or the better perspective hat. And so we jump to wanting to help them to feel better. But what ends up happening is our kids end up perhaps feeling a bit dismissed, or not understood, or not validated. So take a moment with your kids. If your kids are bringing up a worry, or you're seeing a behavior that gives you a clue that they're really worried about something, um, that's the time to connect and have a discussion. And that discussion needs to be a healthy, truthful, and factual conversation about the COVID-19 virus that's based on information from experts. And we want to be doing that in a way that's age appropriate for their development, right? So we're providing enough information, right, that they can make sense of it, and focus as well on what's in their control, or what's in your control as a family. Perhaps it's making sure that you're abiding by all the recommendations to keep yourself safe. Focus on what's in our control. Focus on, what's being done outside of our household to manage the virus, and so forth. So that's sort of what I would say in terms of responding to the anxiety. But there's also, I think, a preventative piece, where we want to make sure that our kids aren't having too much access to, or media, news. Be mindful of those ears that might be overhearing your language, your discussion, your fears as a parent. We often think our kids are very busy, playing in the other room, or they're not even listening to what we're talking about. But I think what we find in our discussions with children is that they are getting these bits and pieces. And what happens when children get bits and pieces of scary information is that they can put that together and formulate something in their brain that might actually be even worse than the truth of the matter. Right? So we really need to pay attention to the language we're using, our body language, our alarm, right? So if we're alarmed and we're scared, you betcha our kids are going to be alarmed and scared too, right? They're feeding off of us. So we really want to try and, manage that the best that we can. There's a lot of information out there. So when our kids get pieces of it, we want to have those healthy, communicative moments where we can provide that comfort and support. I'm right here with you. We're going to get through this, right? So that's what I would suggest.
Diane, I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add to that you may have seen from your own experience with families.
Well, I have to say Lisa's answer sums it up so well. Everything that she said were also a lot of the points I was going to make too. I think having an honest conversation, again, depending on the age of the child, is important. I think parents are being asked to be everything to their families right now. So, they have to instill hope in their children. They have to also, validate the feelings of the children. I guess my concern is always who's taking care of the parent. So, you know, the anxiety is around the family, and yes, absolutely, we have to do that for our kids, but it's, I think, if possible, so important that the parent also finds somewhere else to reach out to. And that could be, you know, a close family member, it could be a friend, it could be a stranger, it could be the phone line that, you know, you call us at. But I think in order to keep going, because this isn't ending anytime soon, that the parent also has to be cared for and supported. That's all I'd add. Lisa summed it up perfectly.
That's very good. Thank you very much to both of you.
Yeah, and Diane, I think sharing that information about some of those virtual support groups for parents, I think you can do it through the chat, or we'll share it after, just so people have a touchstone outside of their own families, I think can be incredibly helpful. Kim and Cheryl, I'm going to go to you for the next questions. And again, some of these were submitted online, and they are on the heavier side. So obviously, you know, it's not the experience of every family, but we did get a couple of questions about children participating in self-harm, children wanting to say they want to die, that they don't know if they will die because of the pandemic, you know, children or young adolescents, I would imagine, you know, really struggling with eating disorders. So perhaps the two of you could sort of unpack some of that. I mean, clearly in some cases, additional intervention is required. What should parents be looking for? What are you seeing? And what would you tell parents to do, right? If they feel that their child is going to a darker place than any parent would want a child to go to, you know, regardless of age or stage of their development. So maybe I'll start with you, Kim, and then go to Cheryl.
Yeah, it's a really important question to ask, and even the question feels scary. It feels scary to ask, it feels scary to hear, but it is a reality, and it is on parents' minds. That, sure, I mean, kids are at risk at times. If we're speaking around, you know, suicidality or suicide ideation, those are really scary things to think about. So I thought I would speak to that a little bit. You know, I do have another doom and gloom list, but I think it's important to note that, you know, not one particular sign or symptom necessarily means that your child is at risk for suicide, or this is more about, okay, are there some patterns or some things that I might be noticing where it might be helpful to have a conversation with my child. So, you know, we want to look out for things like, you know, unusual or consistent patterns of isolation. And I'm not talking about, you know, your teenager who likes to be in the room all the time and talk to their friends. I mean, you know your child. And so in the way you know your child, is there some unusual ways or consistency around this isolation? Or are you noticing a sudden change in their functioning? You know, are they suddenly withdrawing from friends or family, or deteriorating, or their performance deteriorating with school or activities? Are they talking a lot about death, or writing about death, or researching death? Something else to be aware of. Noting that, you know, kids and youth with low mood, consistent low mood or depression, we need to be cautious, because we know that depression can often get in the way of rational thought. Have they experienced any significant personal loss or a crisis? You know, I know we're all going through crisis. You know, are they going through anything that might also be really, really challenging for them on top of that? Do they have any prior suicide attempts? We know that that makes a higher risk for that person, for that youth. Is there any expressions of hopelessness or feeling trapped in life, or feeling like they're a burden to people? It's worth having a conversation around their feelings about that. Are you noticing maybe your youth is engaging in risky, reckless, or destructive behavior? Again, I think you'd mentioned, the drug use, the self-injury, the reckless driving. We want to look into that. It doesn't mean that they want to kill themselves, but we do want to look into that. We want to explore that with them. Or, we might notice passive statements like, I should just kill myself, or repeated patterns of this, or maybe things would just be better if I wasn't there. So these are things, we want to note, or we want to check in on. Like I said, it doesn't mean that these things are happening, or one of these things are happening, that your child is going to hurt themselves. But these are just some things in our clinical minds that we think about, or want to know more about. It is never so black and white. Youth are also really good at hiding it. They don't always show, they're not always telling us or communicating very clearly. And that doesn't mean that we're bad parents, or that we're not attuned to our children. But I think that if we work towards building really positive, connected relationships with our children, then we have the best chance at creating a safe place to talk about these really difficult things.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Cheryl next.
Thank you. And Kim, that was a nice sort of segue then into sort of how I'll answer the question, is more so in terms of how to have those healthy conversations around self-harm and suicide. Because as Kim mentioned, that, it's a hard thing to talk about, and it's even just a hard question. And I think that it's important to recognize too, that as parents, when you hear anything that sounds like the young person and your child might be thinking about self-harm or suicide, your alarm goes up, right? Your alarm skyrockets, because you go into that mama bear, papa bear wanting to protect your child, right? Wanting to swoop in and protect them, of course. And so I would say, one of the first things too is to be able to just take a moment, right? Take a moment to slow things down, take a moment for yourself to breathe. I know Diane has been talking about, help for parents, right? Support to be able to reach out to others as well. So taking a moment to kind of slow things down so that you're able to respond to your child rather than react out of that fear and out of that alarm. And then have the conversation, right? Be able to ask that question. It's hard, right? Are you thinking of suicide? Are you thinking of self-harm? Are you cutting? I would even say that because that doesn't come up, it doesn't come out of our mouths that often, that sometimes even practicing saying that can be important and can allow you to start to feel comfortable to then just have that conversation in a way where you feel calm, right? And you feel less triggered by it, and are able to then respond to your child. So I would say then it's, asking that question, because then you'll also get a clear yes or no, most likely. And as Kim said, though, sometimes kids are good at hiding it, right? But being able to ask the question, and you'll get that answer, gives you a bit more clarity on where things are at for your child. And you're approaching that with empathy, right? You're approaching that with validation of emotions and saying, you're not alone, I'm here with you, right? I'm able to handle anything that you're going to say. I'm able to handle any emotions that you're going to be able to, you're going to convey here. I'm here with you. So this is a really hard piece too, right? Is sitting in those emotions. Think also too, we want to fix, right? We want to jump to the fixing, right? Jump to the solutions. We want those children to feel better. But in those moments, it is important to sit in that, as Kim said, the doom and gloom for a period of time, so that your child feels heard, they feel listened to, they feel validated. And then you can move towards the, how can we help, right? What can we do to keep you safe? Who can we get to support us in that? So it's a key message too around that they're not alone, that you're right there with them, right? There's that we message. I will sit with you and we will come up with a safety plan, right? And we can enlist people to support us in that, so that you also as a parent don't feel alone. And I would also say, trust your gut. Again, parents get pulled in all different directions as to, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? What do I do? Trust those gut instincts that you have. And if you feel that your child is at immediate risk of harm, then call 911, or go to the nearest emergency room.
Great, thank you. Those are wonderful answers. We also got a question about eating disorders, and I don't think we've fully addressed it. And so I wondered, Cheryl and Kim, if you could just add anything. And then I did want to also go to Chuck and Lisa. Chuck, I know we have some questions for you soonish, but I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in on this one. So, but maybe before transitioning to the eating disorders question, I wondered if you wanted to weigh in on this particular one.
Sorry, I was looking for the unmute.
No
All right. Yeah, so what I liked about what everybody said so far is really about communication and really about understanding where they're coming from. One of the biggest points of takeaway from working with youth from 16 and up for me was that a lot of people don't have a lot of, how do you put this, understanding of what their emotions are asking for, right? Because we know in the mental health field, the emotions are kind of like our radar in which we organize the world, right? When we feel angry, it's like a boundary issue and this sort of thing, but we learn that over time. And with self-harm, the kids these days, you're feeling a lot of isolation right now, right? And there's the grief is a big one, and loss, right? And this is the time of their lives where they're trying to connect. Social connection is one of the biggest needs for them right now. And so if they walked into the COVID-19 pandemic feeling isolated, then being in it is going to be even more isolated. So the best thing you can do is to communicate with them and try to understand what language they're using and what they're asking for. And you have to be patient about it. So I know that we were talking a lot about how parents are pulled in every direction. So it can seem like a pretty big ask, but it's so important to just be sitting with them, trying to figure out what they're trying to say, not fixing it, but be with them so they can understand where is that loneliness coming from? What are you looking for? And what are we going to do about it together? And I think that's the biggest part of it for me.
Thank you. Lisa, any quick words before we move to eating disorders?
No, I don't feel
Okay.
like I don't feel like I have
Perfect.
anything to add. That was well said, everyone.
Okay. So on the eating disorders front, which I think affects both young women and young men, especially given the kind of social isolation, the loss of control. I know that sometimes eating disorders are a way to regain an effort to regain control. Cheryl or Kim, Lisa, any comments on that one? Again, we've been so reduced to our homes and to online activity where often there is damaging information about controlling eating habits, right? That are very, very harmful. Any thoughts about what parents need to look for on that front?
I think I'll jump in here, and I think you make a really good point about that. Sometimes for eating disorders, that can be that when there's a loss of control in the environment, which of course during the global pandemic there's such a loss of control and a lot of unknown that sometimes then that can produce sort of a, well, what can I get control of? What can I take control over? And of course we, that notion of we can control sort of what goes into our body, and certainly there's heightened alarm for sure, and parents of course, yeah, trying to look for signs and symptoms. And I think that was one of the questions, right, is what to potentially look for. And there's no sort of set kind of signs or symptoms in terms of, but because it can look like a lot of things, right? Eating disorders can be, there's a vast array, right, of signs and symptoms, but certainly, preoccupation with food or with weight, or avoidance of eating with other people, excusing oneself during meals or after meals, that kind of thing. Excessive exercising as well, something to potentially look out for. Finding food or food wrappers in places where they wouldn't normally be could be something to look out for as well. Again, certainly not an exhaustive list, but I think the main point as well is around what's underlying these behaviors, right? And tackling what's underlying it. Chuck mentioned a lot of loss, right? A lot of loss and grief, a lot of heightened anxiety. And just looking at how do we get below the surface? If we look at things as sort of an iceberg, right? The iceberg, you can see the tip of the iceberg, but underneath the iceberg is a lot larger underneath the surface. And that's what we want to get below to, is what's going on underneath the surface, what's happening to that person, and what are those emotions and those loss and anxieties.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone wants to add on the eating disorders front, or are we good? I just wanted to acknowledge that we haven't received, we've had some sharing of resources in the chat. I don't know if there's anyone participating or listening that would like to ask a question. You could use the raise hands function, if so, or put it in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to ask Councillor Stracher-Yan to ask, I think we're calling you Chuck, but I see Charles on the screen, Charles. So I'm not sure what's your preferred way of being addressed.
I always make that super confusing. I do prefer Chuck.
Okay, good to know. Okay.
You stole my first question. I was going to ask the same thing.
Councillor Stracher-Yan, before you ask those questions, I meant to acknowledge, so just before I forget, we do have Megan coming here, as well as I think her colleague Shannon from the Kentville Stress Release Center. So I wanted to welcome them formally. I know they work closely with Charles. We also have Lindsay Shepherd, who I think runs the children's program at Southgate. And we have Ann Walsh, who's a wonderful community leader and art therapist as well. So I know that there are some other people on the call who are resources in the community for our youth. That's what I'm seeing right now. So if I've missed anyone, please introduce yourself in the chat, because we are compiling resources that we can post on our website and share via social media. So please don't be shy. Certainly make sure that you share whatever you'd like to share in the chat box. So not seeing any raised hands, Councillor Stracher-Yan, I'll pass it over to you for some questions to Chuck.
Thank you very much. Chuck, I guess the questions coming to you first, I want to say how wonderful it is to have a resource in our community such as yourself, whose focus is on men and older adolescent boys. I think that it's very valuable to have that wide array of resources to be able to, focus in on particular issues that may be more prevalent in boys and men for sure. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. We received a couple of questions related to certain behaviors and adaptation to circumstances focused on boys. And so I'll direct both of these towards you. And starting with the first one is that the question is that my sons do not seem to be adapting as well to online learning as my daughters. Are there any type of special supports for boys for parents to consider that really are focusing on the specific needs for boys, or perhaps this question is too specific and maybe the resources would be the same for both? So please, over to you.
Thanks very much. So I'll talk about some things that we can do with that. We know something that we talk about on like the adult channels, right, is a lot of the Zoom fatigue. That's like the funny thing that's going around right now, because it's very real. This is the first time ever for most of us that we're spending a lot of time just staring into a screen. And we can just imagine what that's like, staring into a screen and doing schoolwork, especially when the routines are all over the place. So one of the aspects that I do like to talk about is really trying to understand from their perspective what they're going through when it comes to it. And, some of that could be very direct questions like, what's happening? You don't seem to be getting the work done, which can seem kind of hostile, and maybe you'll get a door slammed, or maybe they won't do it. But the idea is to find out from them, what's going on and what can we do? What are you finding? Because this can seem to be, remember, they're out of their social network now, staring in front of a computer, trying to pay attention. So it can be extremely boring. And that's the first thing I'll bring up, extremely boring. So trying to empower them to make the learning experience more fun by figuring out what they need together. So it's all about common communication with this. And if they're watching you, if you're at home trying to be a teacher, trying to do work and trying to take care of the house at the same time, you're going to be anxiety ridden. You might be bored. And being open about that communication together to try to sort out what you can do. Aside from that would be the energy levels. So even as kids, so I'm not sure if this would be isolated between boys or girls, because I think it's just kids, teenagers, but the energy levels are through the roof. And if you're trying to sit there doing something that may be boring or out of the ordinary, which can also elicit the same anxiety response, they need to find ways to make it fun and give them a routine where they can maybe, spend 30 minutes doing some work, play outside in the backyard, do something to get their mind going in a different way and the activity going in a different way. So that's a lot of how I would address something like that.
Yeah, I think I have a daughter and two boys, and certainly the capacity to do the online learning and to stay as focused varies greatly between the eldest and then her younger brothers. And so knowing how to switch things up for each of them is a bit of a fun exercise that we've learned, I guess, over the last year. I'll put it that way. All very different needs, but yeah, I understand what you're saying is being able to figure out just what works in those circumstances. The other one deals more with, I guess, how they're reacting to the circumstances and related to aggression from older siblings, in their current circumstances. And again, this one was focusing on boys experiencing more aggression from an older sibling, but I think that perhaps it would be applicable regardless if it's boys or girls, because I think they're all, everybody's experiencing things in their own way. So what would you suggest to parents and how to be able to manage or mitigate that kind of circumstance, and perhaps from getting worse at the home front to start?
Mm-hmm. So this would come down to pretty deep communication between everyone involved. As we mentioned, I think it was Cheryl and Kim talked a little bit in both ways about how behavior is communication, right? And then the language that they express that in is through their emotions. So essentially the way I would look at it is that emotions are the radar we're using to express an unmet need. So we need something, we might not be connected to that need, and then we're going to do something to get it. And it might not be a productive way to get it, but we're going to try to get it nonetheless. And that could come down to whether or not we have a good understanding of how to get that need, or maybe, and I suspect this is what this case is all about. This is what screams to me, is that when aggression and frustration are present, it's because you're frustrated. This situation is frustrating for everyone involved. And there's a lot of needs. So if I think of social connection that you're just not going to get and you can't, it's the door is closed on that for now, and it has to be. So there's going to be a lot of pent up frustration with nowhere to go. And so I would encourage the parents to have a really deep conversation around trying to sort out what is there. Are they frustrated? Do they have a better way of expressing that? Do they feel comfortable expressing that to me as the parent? And in what ways can we get involved together to better find an outlet for it? Or at the very least have solidarity on it. Because if the child's frustrated, I think Lisa said this, if the parents filled with anxiety, the child's got it times 2 because they're looking at us, right? They look at us for all of this, and they're learning how to cope from us. So if we're able to communicate with them on better ways to cope by partnering up with them, so to speak, then I think that'll work out really well.
Yeah, I for sure. I think that there's, frustration abounds, and it's hard when on the parental side that you're frustrated and not transmitting that to the kids and adding sort of onto their plate as well, as far as that goes. So I'm noticing a theme here, a lot of communication. So I kind of knew that was going to come up, but it's easier said than done in some circumstances. So
and I think as well, I'm just reading one comment in the chat. By Mariette, I hope I pronounced that right. She just mentioned that her 8-year-old needs to channel his energy into physical activity, and he's talking about wrestling and trampoline. And that's another side of maybe where that frustration is coming from, right? The boredom. It's a pent up energy, and they just, all wound up, ready to run a marathon, but they can't go to the park. So what else are they going to do but practice maybe the WWE wrestling with their son or with their with their siblings?
Is there a guideline, Chuck, and maybe to others on the call? What's that balance between now physical activity, like screen time, being at home? Is there a rule of thumb? Like, is it an hour? Is it 2 hours? I know there are philosophies that say your kids should be out for 8 hours a day or 4 hours a day, but what's the baseline here? And maybe Chuck, I can start with you. Is there any guidance you'd provide to families in terms of how much outdoor or indoor, or is it very individually sort of, determined just because the kids have so many, different personalities and needs?
I take it from an individual personality perspective. And it really depends on what they need. That's it, right? How much energy they have. I know, like, when I was younger, I was a very energetic kid. I also have ADHD, so I'm like raring to go consistently. And so for a lot of the individuals that I treat with ADHD in that grade, we kind of come up with a routine. What does it look like to you? Do you need to do like 30 minutes of work and then go run or something like that? But it's part of the fun for them to plan it with everyone, because they know their bodies. Like, your kids better than anyone, and they know themselves,
right?
Even if some better than anyone. And that's something that they can plan. But it's, with all of this, it's very useful to take a creative approach to it, because you're right. It was said earlier, we've never experienced this before. So getting everybody on board and taking a creative approach to how we do this will not only make it more fun, but also help that social connection piece, because we're all participating in getting it through it together.
Okay, sounds good. Any other comments on that from colleagues before we move to the next question? Okay, so thank you, Councillor Strachan. Was there anything in your queue for Charles before we move on?
Well, no, not directly for Charles. I did have one more question regarding screen time.
Yes,
I think we put this to Kim, and I think we've touched on it to a certain extent about screen time and how there's so much more of that and what that means and the behaviors associated with being in front of a screen all day. I know personally, we tried to do a little online happy hour kind of thing at work, and I didn't even want to do that at the end of the day because I was just tapped out, right? I had had enough. So I can certainly appreciate that. I guess the other challenge that we have with COVID is because we've gone through these periods of really extreme isolation, and the kids still want to be able to interact with their friends. So we have online during the day for school and so on. And then there's another layer of wanting to use this as a tool for social interaction. So Kim, I'll put this to you. And, do you have any tips on how to manage that balance, of a lot of online time, but also needing to use it as a way to keep them closer to their friends and, break some of that isolation that we have by being stuck with our families all day?
Yeah, I think this is a big question, and I'm sure everyone on this panel would have really interesting things and perspectives on this. It is a big question. I put a lot of thought into what would I say about this. So, at first I thought, if I can imagine myself too as, and I am a parent as well, but, I know that parents are scared that their kids are, looking at things that they're maybe not aware of because of how much screen time they're at, or are they going to be forming an addiction to screens, or are they losing their family connection? Are they going to be less and less interested in anything else? I just need to say that I think this is so normal, and that we're all worried about this, therapists included. We're all, we are in a bit of an unprecedented time. But, I don't have the best answers or the right answers, but I can certainly share a little bit about what I find helpful and guides me in my practice around this topic. So absolutely, you said it very well. I think kids are, think about pre-COVID time, right? There was so much social interaction, which we took for granted, right? Social interaction at school, during our extracurriculars, in our neighborhoods, the playground, at each other's homes. And so right now we don't have access to that. And we've all mentioned how important connection is right now to combat the isolation and the psychological effects of isolation. So yes, it is important that we stay connected, and the best way we can do that right now is through social media and through other platforms. kids are connecting with their friends this way, but they're also connecting with screens for entertainment, and they're connecting it to deal with stress and to check out, and when's enough, right? So, you know, I often think about, I think it's really important to be able to have a balance of some level of physical activity in a day. You know, in a lot of ways we're limited, but we certainly can get creative. You know, if you just need to, you know, kick the ball to, you know, toss the football, or you know, kick the soccer ball together, or go for a walk, but some sort of physical activity. Are they doing their academics? Are they, you know, finishing their schoolwork? Are they getting good sleep? And do we have some family connection? I think that if we have some sort of balance in there between some physical activity, academics, sleep, and family connection, I think we're doing well. I think we're doing really well. Does that mean 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 10 hours of screen time? I don't know what the answer is to that. I think that what's more important isn't necessarily the hours, but maybe the quality of you know, what's going on in their day-to-day. I do, though, think that it becomes unhealthy if there is little interest in anything outside of your screens, or if you have consistent meltdowns over long periods of when they can't have their screens, or that there is no balance between those pieces that you know, the academics and the activity. If given the opportunity, would they engage with peers in the community? And if they wouldn't, then I think it's important to be able to balance that, or to be able to, you might need to start, okay, if I'm going to limit the screen time now, I have to replace that as well. Like I can't just remove something, or a need, or something that's engaging and fun, and not sort of replace that. Maybe get creative and do something together as a family, or a board game, or an art or craft, or something. Because that's just how our brain works. I think if you take something away and don't replace it, we're always going to think about it until we get it again. So we might need to schedule that and be creative and incorporate that a little bit into our into those routines. But most importantly, above all, though, I think that we need to be kind to ourselves as parents right now, and that we just need to prioritize our physical and mental well-being over anything else.
Yeah, I think the quality versus quantity is certainly something that's come up in our house, absolutely, and it's you know, it's a hard one to explain to kids, because they want to know how much time they have, as opposed to how good the time was actually spent, how well it was spent. So, and I think I just before I pass this back over to the mayor for some additional questions, I just the point about knowing. Being able to know as a parent that you're doing okay, you know, that's a hard part to assess when you know, you're kind of trying to compare it to what you would have done before, or how you would have done it before, and then setting all these many layers of expectations. Yeah, that's a very important point. You know, sometimes to just be able to give yourself a break and say you're doing as best as you can, and sometimes that's just it, right? So, thank you.
Cheryl, Lisa, or Chuck, is there anything you want to add on screen time? It's a dominant, I think, reality of parents. You know, no matter again what their resources or age and stage of the kids they have in terms of the interaction with the screen. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Okay. Okay, great. Then I'll just go on. We just have actually a couple of more questions. So again, Councillor Starkey and I aren't intending to dominate the discussion, but so if anyone wants to ask a question, please just use that raise hand function, or put it in the chat, and we'll read it out. A couple of the other questions that came up in advance were how do we manage some of the behavioral or you know, other diagnosed issues that kids come up with, such as, for example, ADHD, so that are occurring in families. One of the parents reached out to say that they were really interested in some, her words were sort of drug-free alternatives. And I think part of her question was, or part of what I thought about when she submitted this question online is, how do you know, how do you manage the circumstances in which kids are growing up, right, these days versus, diagnosed, exceptionalities for which often medication may be appropriate. But this parent in particular was looking at whether or not anyone could comment on some alternatives where medication wouldn't necessarily be the only way. So Charles, given that you've mentioned ADHD, maybe you want to go down that path. It's a complicated question and we don't know the circumstances of the family. So perhaps you could answer it in a more general sense.
Yeah, I'll take that in more general. So one tool that I found helpful personal life as well as with clients is called the ABCs of ADHD. So that's antecedent, behavior, and consequences. So when it comes to orienting yourself towards ADHD and the habits that are involved, the behaviors are really the already expressed thing that's happening. So if you're trying to change a behavior, you're kind of barking up the wrong tree with that because it's already done. So you want to deal with the antecedents, which simply means what comes before. So that could be the environment. It could be the circumstance. And so when it comes to situations, let's talk about the schooling. I'll just bring it into home what we were talking about before. It's going to be incredibly difficult for some individuals with ADHD to sit in front of a computer for long periods of time. And that's a lot to ask for a kid in general. But someone with all that energy who's like, can be very spastic, how the hell are you supposed to do that? So what you want to do is pay attention to the environment. How can we set it up in such a way that's conducive to the behavior that you want them to have? And you'll start with talking to them about what behavior is going to serve them best, because they already understand the consequences. And if you're frustrated at, like, let's say, lack of schooling, so are they. They're going to be very frustrated over the fact that they can't seem to get something done. And it's just going to be exacerbated in the behavior. So if you can set the environment up in a way that's conducive, then you'll be able to work together to set that up. So for example, one of the common tools that I'll use is colorful Post-it notes for tasks. I'm famous for my Post-it notes. And essentially, I'll divide the Post-it notes based on the tasks that I have that day. They go on the side of the computer. And then when you're finished one, you can take it and you can shred it. You can have a party as you're destroying this Post-it note, whatever you need to do. But you get this rush from like, I did it, fantastic. And you never have to look at it again. But it's very visual. It's very kinesthetic. It's physical and it's fun. Another sense when you're dealing with rituals is to divide their day up a little bit better. So instead of spending 3 hours in front of the computer for school, half hour, go for a run, play, do something physical, come back to it. But work with them on setting up the environment that's conducive. And always remember that if you're frustrated over the behaviors that are coming up, so are they.
Any other comments from colleagues?
I might add, Mayor, that I think at our agency, this is one of the things that we see all the time. Kids will be presenting with, what's labeled difficult behaviors, easily angered, outbursts, these types of things. They may or may not have a diagnosis of ADHD. But there are various, ways that our clinicians at our agencies support these families. Medication is not typically, a first line treatment for us. And so in working with our families, one of the main things that we see with children and youth with ADHD is significant issues with emotion regulation or the ability to sort of, keep themselves calm. So they do end up having, a kind of spike in frustration and those types of things. So really working with parents on how they can co-regulate, meaning help their children to bring back their sense of calm. And like Chuck was saying, many coping strategies that are tailored kind of to the individual, But one other thing that's really important is that we're collaborating, with our school board staff, with folks in the classrooms, to educate and to also help to develop a plan that's going to accommodate the children. All of our children have different needs. They learn differently, have different areas of that they struggle with. So really developing a collaborative approach to make life work for the child is really important, rather than trying to fix that child.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're really nearing the end of the forum, and I just want everyone listening to it's a final call for any questions that you can put in the chat or to raise your hands. We just have one final question, and it's really, I think it's similar to what we were talking about in terms of ADHD, but it's really just around anxiety, and how do you manage that, the child's anxiety, not simply about COVID, but something that's manifesting in a more significant way. And I wondered if I could have each of you make a final comment, and you can speak to this particular question. The actual question is, my son's anxiety is at an all-time high. A nail biting habit has turned into finger biting, often to the point of bleeding. How can I help? So this is obviously a parent who's struggling with a habit that may have turned into something more persistent. And perhaps in answering the question, you could, Cheryl and Lisa, just speak to your virtual drop-in hours clinic while you're answering that question. And also, if Kim, you could again just speak to the availability of your clinic, and Chuck likewise. So just a final comment, any response to that particular question, and the resources that are available in the community through the clinic services that you or your agency provides. And then finally, before you go there, I also did want to recognize another clinician in our community, and that is Courtney. Hello, Courtney. Courtney opened a psychological practice here just back, I think, in the fall. So Courtney, thank you for joining. I see you here, and Courtney is with the Courtney James Counseling and Psychotherapy, and she is in downtown Kempville. So thank you, Courtney, for hopping on. I'm just scrolling through the chat. Significant pressures on parents, virtual connections don't really cut it. How do parents, I'm just reading the question, parents are cut off from their other significant relationships, friends, neighbors, patrons, your favorite bar, restaurant. Virtual connections don't cut it. They are not quite satisfying. How do parents handle their own isolation? So perhaps you can roll that into a final comment. And I think we also have Diane here, and maybe Diane, we can start with you in terms of that parental isolation that families are feeling, and then we'll go to the rest of our speakers.
Sure, thank you. It is tough. It's a real concern. The virtual connection I'm reading doesn't cut it. I hope to say we won't be in this much of a lockdown for a really long time, and we can get back to even having distance outdoor visits with friends or family. Right now, the connections by virtual method really seem to be one of the biggest ways of connecting with people. I mean, we can still do phone calls and FaceTime, which is very similar. I guess I'm looking at the next block of when this lockdown opens up a tiny bit and the fresh air comes back into the factor, and you're social distancing, but you're having at least the opportunity to see somebody face to face outdoors at a distance.
Good contact. Okay, I'll go to Kim, Cheryl, Lisa, and then Chuck, to you for the last word. Kim?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I thought, you're right. It doesn't cut it. It's not the same. But I think it also speaks to, this idea of flexibility. I think that we can get very stuck in what we think, like in our how we think and what we think the right way to do things. And no, we can't go out to a bar, but if we can't shift that idea, then we're going to cause ourselves a lot of pain and anger and irritability because we are limited. There isn't we can't change it. So we have really no option but to be flexible. And when we aren't flexible, that creates more problems for us and within our relationships, right? So we might complain more and just, and yeah, we are disappointed. We're disappointed we can't have that sweet 16 birthday party that you imagined you would for your teenager, or, the 90th birthday party for your mom or dad, or, but we do have to practice being flexible with our thinking. And I just had a thought I wanted to add around the anxiety piece. I know that, especially with children, we're all living in a state of anxiety. Everybody's anxiety is elevated. And I think sometimes if we can think about the language that we're using, we hear every day, it's not safe to go to school, or it's not safe to go to your friend's house, or we can't go to grandma and papa's because it's not safe, or, we could get somebody sick, or, and I think the language of it's not safe and constantly hearing it's not safe is also triggering those alarm bells that are already elevated. So even just shifting language to being, I think, we aren't going to school. It's safer, if we stay home, or it's safer if we don't visit grandma and papa right now, or we're going to put a pause on that, or we're going to put a break on that. Just to kind of, somehow help normalize something that's not so normal, but I do think that language does elevate, especially for children, the anxiety. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Kim. Cheryl?
For sure. I think that with respect to high anxiety, and I think those are really good points for sure. With high anxiety and noticing sort of changes in behavior, and again, we're looking at sort of behavior as communication. One of the things that I like to sort of talk about is the notion of sometimes the need to go back in order to move forward. And I think that when we talk about, maturation is quite spontaneous. And right now we're in this unprecedented time, right, of high alarm, and we're seeing lots of changes in behavior. So one thing I like to sort of talk about is just if we look at, if you look at the age of your children, so chronologically, they might be one age, they might be, say, a 10-year-old. And then we go, okay, but intellectually, how old are they? And you might say, oh, well, intellectually, they're maybe 12 or 13. And then you say, okay, well, what about emotionally? Emotionally, how old do they seem? And you might say, oh, well, they're about their age emotionally, or sometimes maybe they are older than their age. And then I like to ask, in times of upset, in times of frustration, in times of high anxiety, how old does your child look? And oftentimes we say they often would look younger than their chronological age. And so you might even say, oh, well, when they're upset, they actually look maybe like they're 3 or 4. And then I'd say, okay, if they were 3 or 4 years old, what would you do? Right? Do that, right? That notion to go back in order to move forward. So oftentimes filling that need, right? Filling that need, providing that comfort, then can help to be able to move forward. And then the other thing that I would say would be that for all of us, for children and adults, capacity changes day by day. This is an ever-changing situation. And I don't know who said this earlier on in the pandemic, so I don't know who to attribute this to, but somebody used the term Corona coaster in terms of describing emotions. And I love this term because it's so accurate. One day we feel great, sunny skies, right? And the next day feeling pretty down, feeling pretty isolated, feeling pretty lonely, right? That storm is rolling in. And I think that, and Kim mentioned this earlier, but being kind to ourselves. I think we have a lot of high expectations on ourselves. I think parents place a lot of expectations and pressure on themselves. And I think we need to have compassion for ourselves and be able to say, you know what? Yeah, my capacity changes each day, right? The Corona coaster of emotions.
Cheryl, just before I go to Lisa and Charles to finish, do you want to just quickly talk about the virtual walk-in clinics?
Sure. Actually, Lisa's probably
Okay.
the better person to talk about that. She's kind of the head of our walk-in.
Got it. Okay, great. So Lisa, there you go. There's your segue. And if you could also address the question, of course, of anxiety and virtual connections, et cetera.
I think it's all really well said. I think, you know, there's just so much loss, right? So I think, you know, everyone is experiencing a grief reaction in their own way. And I think we have to be okay with not being okay right now. This too shall pass, but right now we're in the thick of it, and it doesn't feel okay. And we are and screens are not cutting it, and I'm missing. You know, I saw one note that brought a tear to my eye in the chat. You know, about hugging your grandkids and not being able to see family. I mean, that is all real. I think we're all kind of feeling it. We're watching our kids feel it. It's awful. So I think, you know, we have to really acknowledge the losses and be able to grieve together and in your family unit. So that's my kind of closing remark there. I really do want to talk about our services just briefly, because of course children's and mental health of Leeds and Grenville, children's mental health is available. Services are available in the Kemptville community, of course, as well as Brockville and some other locations, Prescott and Gananoque. So you can enter into our agency simply by calling our number, and I'm sure we're going to share that maybe information out if we could. And you can also refer through our website directly at cmhg.ca. And what you can expect if you self-refer or you refer yourself, you don't have to have a doctor's referral or a third-party referral. What you can expect is somebody would be giving you a call to complete an intake. Our hope is within a couple of days, and you'll have that initial session within a couple of weeks. And that's for entering into our ongoing service, okay? But we also, as you mentioned, of course, we do run a walk-in clinic from 11 to 7 in both our Kemptville and Brockville locations, where we have 2 clinicians on staff in each location to manage folks that are wishing to see. Right now we are doing our services virtually and over the phone, and if needed in person as well. And we can have those same day appointments. You can also call ahead to book in the pandemic world that we're in right now. So if you're interested in having a one-time session to talk about a concern, feel free to call us or find us on our website and schedule a walk-in appointment, and that's very easily accessible. We don't have to go through an intake, and you can have immediate service.
Great, thank you. Chuck, over to you for a final comment.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to address anxiety first, just the question specifically. I think it'll be really helpful just to illustrate a little bit about what anxiety is. So we talk about it a lot, and I just wanted to give a brief explanation because that could help a lot when you're looking at your son or daughter who are doing these things to understand why they're doing it. Anxiety, for the most part, is fear-based, and it can feel like a lack of control. And you're going to want to do something to either self-soothe or gain some sort of sense of control for immediate safety or immediate self-soothing. And anxiety is really nervous system based. So for the most part, it's immediate safety or immediate satisfaction of that fear, not long-term consequences. It's something that needs to be done now. And so one of the ways that I like to explain this in this context is kind of like an RPM gauge. So on any given day, your engines are going to rev towards an anxiety response. A certain level of stress is going to be normal. But if it reaches the upper end or it hits your red line, so to speak, if you think the RPM of a car, then the first thing you're going to do is either a self-soothe technique or something to gain a sense of control. And so in this case, with what the individual is going through is to try to pay attention to where they're at during the day. See if you can get a read on, where the RPM gauges are going, what is stressing them out the most, do you know enough about it, can I communicate more? And then you can start to teach them ways to kind of bring that down a bit. Little self-care techniques, little ways to come off that need to self-soothe, but also to communicate with them about what is the fear, what's going on there. Maybe they're feeling isolated because they're not talking to you about their COVID anxiety or their social isolation anxiety. So those are a couple of things that I would suggest. So hopefully that snapshot can help you make sense of it. But secondly, I really like what Lisa said about the second question. It's something that's not often said and can't be said loud enough. But for the most part, what we're going through sucks. There's a lot of grief there and it hurts and it's really weird. So we have to get really good at being okay, not being okay, because it's weird. So we do the best we can to bring your RPM gauges down as adults, and be okay with that. And then, you know what, if we're not at a 10, we're at like a 5. Okay, we did it. That's a success. And that's really what I have to say about that. So as far as the Kemptville Stress Relief Center is concerned, so a lot of what we offer, aside from one-on-one counseling as well as couples counseling, is we have free monthly community workshops. And the themes of those workshops will change each month. But even if it isn't specific to kids or parents, it can often still be helpful for any person as a human being, as we like to say, because we're all humans. So we have to get through this as humans. We're working on more groups and workshops in the future to address our specific niches, one of which will be parenting. So Shannon and Katie specifically will be dealing with a lot of parenting. But because these are community and free community workshops, the community builds them. So if anybody's listening and they're thinking of some sort of valuable community workshop they'd like to attend, they can email us and we'll set that up. That's a large part of how we do it.
Great. Well, it is a weird world, and these are certainly weird times. So there is now a slide, so take a screenshot if you need to. As obviously these are some of the resources that are available right now. And I just want to thank all of our very willing participants this evening, and all those who have joined online, and my council colleagues and the community leaders that didn't get a chance to speak today. We do hope that this will be one in a series of community forums that certainly the municipality provides in partnership with agencies, organizations, individuals, and other entities throughout the next few weeks and months. But it was particularly special, I think, for us that we got to start with this one and avail of some really incredible expertise and wisdom. So I want to thank you on behalf of council, on behalf of the municipality, on behalf of all the parents who are watching and tuning in right now, and those that will tune in through the YouTube channel. So thank you very, very much. It's a time of significant struggle and isolation, and how amazing that we're able to come together virtually, which is not necessarily ideal, but certainly creates a kind of accessibility that may have been tougher pre-COVID. So thank you all once again. We certainly appreciate all the heartfelt words, considerations, reflections, and answers to the questions. A really great opportunity for all of us to learn. And I think that's what we're doing. We're learning on this human journey. So appreciate all of our presenters and speakers once again. Thank you.